Hello and welcome to today's session. Another great day here at Learning Impact 2021. We're excited that you have joined us for today's session, Building an Effective EdTech Ecosystem that Scales. We are excited to have one of our gold sponsors here presenting for us today, LearnPlatform. And IMS is super excited to also announce that we recently entered into a partnership with LearnPlatform for our Trusted Apps program. By integrating Trusted Apps program, local and state education agencies will have access to an added layer of evidence related to EdTech product data privacy practices directly within that LearnPlatform's platform, within LearnPlatform. So we are super excited to hear from you guys, and thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. And Rob, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Karen. Appreciate it. Thanks for the introduction. As Karen mentioned, I'm with LearnPlatform. This is certainly not my session, kind of riding sidekick on the Chicago Public Schools session and the work that they've done there. So we're really going to talk today about what it looks like to really scale up an EdTech ecosystem, talking about infusing IMS standards. As Karen mentioned, we are now a partner that integrates through an API the Trusted Ed apps vetting and rating system. So we'll be sure to talk about that a little bit. And just an interesting tidbit, I worked for Chicago Public Schools about 10 years, began as a teacher and did some administrative work and was in a similar role that Anthony and Lorne are in. So for me, this really brings it all full circle, and it's great to have a partnership with them. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it off to Lorne to do just a quick introduction, and then we'll go to Anthony for his introduction and to start the presentation. So hi, Lorne, can you hear us?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yeah, sounds good.
Perfect. Thanks for the intro, Rob. So I am Lorne Rodriguez. I'm the EdTech specialist for CPS with the Department of Curriculum Instruction and Digital Learning. And I'll pass it off to Tony.
Hey, good morning, y'all. My name is Tony Reynoso. I'm the manager of EdTech operations for Chicago Public Schools. And I'm excited to talk to you guys today about how we've been kind of scaling up our digital ecosystem and how the LearnPlatform and IMS have been really, really great partners with that work. And I think,
so, yeah.
Let's
go
just
ahead.
go
I was
ahead.
going to say, yeah, thanks both to you. And I'll just kind of advance the slides. Let me know as we go. And folks, feel free to come off of mute, interrupt us, throw some questions and comments into the chat. We're pretty informal here. I may have a collared shirt on, but just a regular old dude. So Tony, why don't you go ahead and kind of kick things off here?
Yeah, and off of that, I hate being interrupted. So type those questions in. All right, so I want to talk to you guys a little bit about how things were in CPS previously, before COVID, before the SOPA legislation, and then kind of set the framework for what we had to start with in terms of building and scaling this kind of technical ecosystem. So if Rob, you can go to the next slide. All right, so I titled this, it's very well written, Chicago Public School graduate myself. So EdTech in the before times, and what I mean by the before times is pre-COVID-19, pre-SOPA legislation, and even pre-Skyline, and our kind of partnership with IMS Global. So CPS is a famously decentralized district when it comes to curriculum and supplemental curricular materials, which is great. For a lot of reasons. We're a huge city, we're a very diverse population, and so schools and school communities are able to kind of work with the curriculums that make the most sense and to meet the needs of their particular subset of students and their communities, right? And so we've been decentralized for a long time. What that means from an EdTech perspective, and this has only grown exponentially in very recent years, is teachers and schools and networks even were able to purchase, download, sample all these various EdTech products. And 10 or 15 years ago, that was a very slim market, right? And there were a few big names out there that everyone was kind of familiar with. But recently, that's blown up. And there's all these different free programs, paid programs, freemium programs, where teachers can download a temporary program to see if they like it for their class, or the network might purchase something, or the school might have something. And this was created kind of like ripe breeding grounds for what's known as shadow IT, right? For all these different programs operating on the CPS network that we're not really aware of from a centralized standpoint. You can even talk to building administrators and find out that they're not even necessarily aware of the different programs that are being downloaded or applications that are being used within their district. So that's kind of what we were starting with before. And as long as the purchasing was under a certain amount, I think $25,000, it didn't trigger our procurement central office team to having to look at any of the purchases. It just kind of came out of the general fund for the school. So we had no idea, in a very real way, what was actually being used in classrooms and in what data was being shared, and the efficacy of these programs, and how much these programs cost, or negotiating power, or anything else like that. Rob, can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so I think estimates out there are in the thousands of unknown programs, and we're really still trying to kind of wrap our heads around that number fully. But Chicago Public Schools is about 542 schools, depending on how you want to count schools, and over 340,000 students, with thousands and thousands of teachers who are Googling and exploring and hearing word of mouth from their friends and from their professional learning communities of what works and what doesn't work, and different levels of tech comfort and ability to really integrate these programs or these with any efficacy. So,
and Tony, if I just could interject just really fast. One of the things that we do as an organization is look at the EdTech tools being used across the country. We release a report called the EdTech Top 40. You can go to our website, LearnPlatform.com, and find that. And what we've seen, obviously, is with COVID, a huge increase in this, this invisible technology, this shadow technology that Tony's talking about. On average, in a smaller size district, we see about 1,900 unique tools being used every month. And you can imagine, if you're in a large system like many of us are here on the call, that's going to exponentially grow there. So used to be called the Wild West. I don't know what it is now, but with adding COVID now, it's maybe the even more Wild West or something like that. But yeah, Tony's hit the nail on the head here.
Yeah, thank you, Rob, for that insight. So, and this was, again, I don't know if I'm going to use the word fine, but acceptable for a long time. And central office really didn't have a way to understand what was out there. And as long as schools were purchasing the tools and people weren't getting harmed educationally, data breach, whatever, it didn't really seem to be a huge issue. But and I used to work for an EdTech vendor, and this was a huge issue when we were working with CPS in general, but there was just so much data passing between schools and school districts and in these third parties, and we didn't really understand what that data was for. And a lot of that was done through manual rostering, CSV files, uploads. So people are just emailing their class rosters with names and student IDs and all this other stuff as an attachment to a stranger, and having the vendor upload it, or they're trying to upload it themselves, or having students input all this information. Sometimes kids are using their personal email addresses as opposed to student email addresses, or they're asking for parent information that we don't generally like to give out. So there's this whole big discrepancy as well of this type of data that's being shared. And word gets out that this data that's being shared is kind of all over the place. I think Rob said the Wild West, right? And then so a group of parents and legislators get together, and they come up with this SOPA legislation that I think they created a while ago, but just came into effect July 1st, 2021. Rob, want to go to the next slide? And SOPA stands for the Student Online Personal Protection Act. And what that does is we're requiring school districts in the state of Illinois to have master service agreements, data share agreements, data privacy agreements with a third-party vendor. And in that, it outlines the data elements that you can and cannot share, and kind of how that data is going to be shared. And a lot of school districts might not have the issues that Chicago Public School has in terms of size and trying to manage the centralized data process. And so we were aware of SOPA. We've been working on it actively for 2 years, talking to our principals, talking to our teachers, working with our communications team, trying to get everything up and running. And part of that led us to find the LearnPlatform as well, right? We wanted to find a system to help us manage and kind of tame the wild west of EdTech products out there, and create this approved tool list and have a one-stop shop for teachers, network leaders, district leaders to look at, to find these different tools. So we have SOPA coming into play, unrelated to COVID or SOPA at all. CPS was also in the works of building the first truly equitable and digital curriculum out there, called Skyline. Culturally responsive. We got all these different vendors to kind of create custom curriculum and detach from their own platforms. And then we wanted Skyline just kind of was released in July as well, but that's been an ongoing project for a few years. And then the unexpected X factor in all this too was COVID-19, right? COVID-19 has had huge impacts on all facets of our lives. But also, education in particular. Distance learning became a frequent term, Zoom meetings, Google Meets, all sorts of ways to reach children equitably. CPS passed out 100,000 Chromebooks to help our kids kind of meet that gap for COVID. To help teachers, it's really impacted our technical infrastructure and how we want to think about having access and what it means to be equitable. Next slide, please.
Yeah. And I'm going to just hop in here to see if Tony needs to take care of his dog too. But it's a good segue because we're going to talk a little bit about current state, how things are. Lauren's going to walk us through a little bit of the implications here with SOPA. And before he gets started, whether you're living in Illinois or not, there's a good likelihood that data privacy is being talked about with maybe parent groups at your state board, potentially in legislation. As an organization that has a national purview here, we're seeing more and more of this type of legislation hitting the streets. There's EdLaw 2D in New York, SOPIPA in California, and there are different iterations of this that exist out there and more coming. Missouri has some teed up for the next legislation session. So big implications here. This is a little bit of a unfunded mandate. It does represent some best practice to some extent in terms of, understanding who your vendors are, making sure there's an agreed upon data privacy agreement. But no doubt it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work on the districts, on folks like Anthony and Lorne. And Lorne's going to kind of walk us through here some of the moving parts as far as the legislation goes.
Thanks, Rob. Yep. So Tony touched briefly on SOPA, but this is a kind of an overview of what SOPA really requires of the CPS. So we have to post a list of all online services. We have to post all the data elements that are being shared with those services. We have to post the contracts with each operator, and those contracts also do have to state the specific data elements that are being shared with those vendors, because that's something that obviously we need to post, but we need to be aware of those data elements because we as a district need to be compliant with SOPA. It is not the responsibility of the vendors. The vendors are not compliant or non-compliant. It is the district that is compliant or not. And so we have to be in charge of all of the data that is flowing through back and forth from the district to the vendors. And we need to be aware of what data elements we've approved for each specific vendor, and that we are only allowing those specific data elements to be shared with those vendors. Next slide, Rob. We have to post the process for how parents can exercise their rights. So we have to allow parents to know If they want to know what data elements of their child is being shared with vendors, they have the right to ask for that, and they need to know how to ask for that. We have to post data breaches within 10 days. We have to have a board policy in place, which everything here is we're doing everything here. Ensure vendors maintain reasonable security procedures. So that is a big part of our relationship with the vendor as well. So you can go to the next slide, Rob. The request for qualification was put into place for SOPA. And so all EdTech vendors, whether they're free or paid, must go through our EdTech request for qualification, or RFQ, for approval. In doing so, they have to submit all of the products that that specific vendor wants to be able to be used within the district. So say a vendor has 20 products and they only apply with 10 of them initially, then only those 10 could be approved. There is a process for allowing, the vendor to continue to add products, but they initially must submit all products that they wish to have approved within the district. So the RFQ will check for security and data integrations and ensures that we do have the master service and data sharing agreement in place. Again, that is required by SOPA. So with every vendor, we have to have an agreement in place with them. And the RFQ is one way to guarantee that we do get an agreement in place with them. We've made this an ongoing process so that we can be sure to capture new products. So if a vendor develops a new product, if a new vendor comes in the scene and they have a great product, we want to continually provide opportunities for those vendors and those products to enter into the CPS ecosystem. And we always encourage vendors, if they are not approved initially, there's all the supplemental rounds are the exact same process. So they are free to continue to reapply and actually meet with us to determine why they were not approved in the first place. And then something very important as well when it comes to the next step of the RFQ is the P&I, the plan for new initiatives. So the RFQ is the first step for any vendor that wants to have products that are used in the district. Once we have a pool of approved products, then the district can decide, either the network in the district or the district as a whole can decide, hey, there is a need for this specific curriculum or whatever the case may be. The district then would initiate a P&I. The P&I would be released to the pool of approved products and vendors that have already gone through the RFQ. And so, as you can see, there's an opportunity for vendors to respond to more comprehensive efforts. In this step, that the vendors would have to detail, so we would detail the required scope and minimum expectations of the vendors, and that would include academic and instructional and technical standards that is required for that specific need. The vendor would be required to provide further documentation. So the RFQ is more of we're going to do a general check on you to make sure that you are who you say you are, that the EdTech products are EdTech products, that the data integrations, the securities, everything's in place. When it comes to this step, we do a little deeper dive into the vendors. We start looking at the actual products and services and the quality, the educational quality, the instructional quality of those products. And then also we start to negotiate more competitive district-wide pricing, because in the RFQ, we are not guaranteeing that any product will be purchased. We are only approving those products for teachers and schools to purchase, but the P&I is for the district to actually purchase a product district-wide. And the end goal would be to put that into Skyline along with the other curriculum that is there, which is why this step will also verify IMS Global Standards, because that is a big part of Skyline, so that we can integrate everything that has to do with Caliper, LTI connections, so that we can have an ecosystem that is seamless and we can gather as much data as possible from it as well.
Thank you very much, Lauren. And Rob shot a question in the chat that I just want to read out loud. He said about how many tools or companies have applied to the RFQ to date. And I think currently we have over 500 tools posted on the LearnPlatform, and the RFQ is an ongoing process, unfortunately. And so we're continuing to evaluate vendors as they come in. So we have a current round of vendors that we're working to evaluate and move forward for board approval.
And those 500 plus products represent about 200 vendors. You can go to the next slide, Rob. So once we have the RFQ process, and then like we said, the P&I is the next process, and that only arises when the district determines that there is a need, a specific need. The vendor onboarding is very important. That comes directly after the RFQ. So once vendors are approved through the RFQ and they have an agreement in place, the EdTech team, which is Tony and myself, we start interacting with the vendor. We send them questionnaires to start gathering information. We start building profiles for them, vendor profiles, but also product profiles. And those product profiles are on the LearnPlatform. So obviously the LearnPlatform is the catalog of our products. They have the approval status. It has the data sharing agreements in place. And also we reach out to each vendor about all of their products, and we request that they send us parent and teacher resources. So if there's teacher facing resources to kind of help the teacher use the product, or if there's parent/guardian facing resources that kind of explain how their child will be using the product, we post all of those on the LearnPlatform as well. And we direct everybody to the LearnPlatform. If they're asking about approval status, if they want to get any resources, it is really our single source of truth for product information with regards to approval status or anything that has to do with the products themselves. And then also through this vendor onboarding process, we establish data integration. So we have required auto rostering to be implemented, and that is a byproduct of SOPA because we have to be aware of all the data that is being exchanged between the district and the vendors. So we've instituted auto rostering so that we know exactly what's going on with all the students, what data is being shared. And so we have a couple of vendors that we have preferred that data integrations get set up through, Clever and Rapid Identity being two, so that we can have oversight over all the data that is being exchanged. And here's a quick snapshot of our CPS technical ecosystem specific to Skyline. I'm sure many of you have seen this already, but this gives a really good overview of the Skyline ecosystem and the different components of it, from Safari Montage being our lore, to School City, the assessment platform, down to Google Classroom, learning management system, and then followed Aspen. And obviously everything has IMS Global Standards baked into it. And so when we are doing the P&I process, we are looking specifically for IMS Global Standards so that we can make sure that when we are implementing those, or including those vendors into the Skyline curriculum, that they do suit the needs of the ecosystem. Next slide.
Yeah, we're gonna get into this. There was one other question too in the chat about what are you doing about keeping teachers away from using tools, that may not be necessarily approved.
Sure. So I think that's a great question, and one that has a very tricky answer, of course. So I think right now we have blasted teachers, district leaders, principals, building leaders with communications over the last several months about the SOPA process and where they can go to find approved tools. We've had safe school trainings and attestation signed and all sorts of stuff, right? But we also know that teachers are problem solvers by nature, and they're helpers by nature, and they're going to try to find the tool that they think best fits the needs of their students in front of them. And that's totally fine. When teachers visit, this isn't in place yet, but this is the plan. When teachers visit an EdTech service that isn't currently approved, they'll receive, I think, what they call a soft block, just a notification that, hey, before you go ahead and click through this page, we currently don't have a contract with this vendor. So keep that in mind as you're moving through it. And that's going to allow the teacher to explore the product to see if it's worth looking into. And then, of course, our RFQ process is continual and ongoing. So we're going to encourage the teachers and educators to reach out to the EdTech team or the procurement team, so we can get the contact information for those vendors and let them know about the next opportunity to become part of our technical ecosystem. I think for students, eventually it'll be more of a hard block. Hey, this, we can't use this. But I think for teachers, of course, we want to allow them to explore all the different possibilities and options that are out there. And also we have to balance protecting our student data and being in compliance with the state law.
Yeah, and I'll just add on what we're seeing here in Illinois. When SOPA really started heating up, we partnered in about 100 districts just in the state. So we've been watching how some of the district processes have unfolded, and it varies. It's all about, I think, how you're messaging it. Yes, there are implications of using a tool that have not been approved, but the more you get ahead of the messaging and say, look, we're providing this as a resource for you. It's more in the carrot than the stick type of mentality that
100%.
You know, you're providing folks with resources that they don't have to spend their time spinning their wheels looking for. And like Tony said, if there are opportunities for a tool that you may want to use in your classroom, setting up that ecosystem and infrastructure in advance and letting folks know that there is or will be a process for that, I think helps put folks' mind at ease.
Yeah, absolutely. And I try to think about this with my teaching hat on. When I was an educator, I used 3, maybe 4 EdTech tools in the classroom, right? And we have currently over 500 approved options to choose from. And EdTech companies are great, and they all do something special, but they're not all that special. And math tools can meet the needs. So whether it's the math tool you're comfortable with or the one that's approved, maybe that's a bit of a conversation to have. But you know, we love being thought partners with our schools and school leaders about what tools are available and how we can best meet the needs of their students with kind of what's already approved, and get them in touch with any training or integration that they might need.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll just add one final thing. You know, on a technical aspect, we've had some districts really block the major bridge, which was the Google authentication, because teachers and students can simply, you know, click and log in, and now suddenly they're sharing student information that under SOPA is technically not allowed. And there are implications. There's not SOPA police out there, but it could turn into a lawsuit if something happens. So some districts have gone as far as, after, you know, these warnings and kind of sharing out the supported resources, ultimately blocking those extensions or tools that are allowing the Google authentication. So that's also something that we're starting to see a little bit more of. Tony, you want to walk us through this last part?
Yeah, sure. So here are, of course, some of the IMS Global Implementation standards that we'll be looking at for our P&I process and for direct integration into Skyline. These standards and qualifications and interoperabilities are going to become more important when we're trying to leverage, like was mentioned earlier, that district-wide purchase. And again, district-wide might not mean all 552 schools. That can mean a couple of networks. That can mean a particular grade level or a subset, but kind of purchase with a large swath of students and teacher usage in mind. So we really want to have a sophisticated EdTech ecosystem, and we were kind of working from like I said, it seemed like the Wild West, and we're really trying to become more understanding and sophisticated, but also know that teachers and end users have different comfort levels with tech, and we're such a large district. There's lots of different stakeholders involved, so making our case in a thorough and thoughtful way is also important. We want to monitor the data exchanges. We want to understand and create out a really great P&I process. And I think there was a question earlier in the chat about how many programs have been purchased district-wide currently. And I think right now we're still establishing the approved vendor pool, and we have not undergone a formal P&I process as a district. But we are planning on having that tool available to any department or networks that need it. One of the biggest things involved in all of this has been transparency into student data, transparency into contracts, and then the LearnPlatform has been invaluable with helping with that, with posting those contracts with the internal teacher-facing site, with the public-facing site, and really making sure that we have a good grasp on the data that's being transferred and the tools that are available out there. The vendor integration and the vendor relationship aspect has been has been good so far. I think I'm sure some vendors aren't happy about the RFQ process or that there's a little more paperwork to go through now. But I think everyone understands that this is what we need to do in order to move forward with compliance and also just to protect our student data in general. These are probably best practices that should have been in place for a while, but now we have some legislation to help us really move the needle. And with COVID and with Skyline and the RFQ, schools are also examining their own digital readiness. Are they a one-to-one school? Are they a bring your own device school? Where are the access points located in the building? How comfortable are teachers using these devices? What's the best seamless integration for different physical hardware as well as kind of software applications out there? Next slide.
So I'm going to just kind of transition here with our philosophy around how districts really navigate the system of technology integration. When we start working with districts or even just districts kind of wanting to do a health check, this is a resource anyone can go to and do a self-audit. And it's edtecheffectiveness.org. What it's doing is really taking a look at the health of your EdTech ecosystem. When through looking at a series of questions, you get the results, it's going to come back with plotting you in an organization, depending on your answers, in a specific category. So I would say, for CPS, when they began, there was a little bit of hacking going on. You've got lots of teachers kind of doing rogue things, maybe buildings doing that. They couldn't really wrap their arms around the system. I would say now, with the improvements they've been making, these processes, the RFQ, the transparency of the system, the library, both for teachers and for parents, they're really getting more towards this optimization. They're smoothing out the road bumps to innovation and personalizing learning that can take place once some of those hurdles kind of get out of the way. So as a research organization, this is what we look at in terms of philosophy, and we've run these reports with thousands of districts. So you get a profile and a score, whatever your organization is, that can help you really understand what are the gaps in terms of how you can, you're scaling up EdTech and what's potentially missing here. And we look at really organizing, streamlining, and analyzing the work that is taking place within a district. So this is not the CPS instance here, but I just want to give you a sense of what this looks like. So if I'm a teacher, I can log in here using my Google credentials and start to look at the library of these approved and sometimes also denied apps and tools, because that's equally important. It's not, oh, did the district forget about it? It's, no, they actually looked at it, they vetted it, and they're saying don't use it. Maybe it's not blocked on the network, but it's a level of transparency that provides comfort for teachers, for the instructors in the classroom. So we've also, as Karen mentioned in the beginning, just embarked on a partnership to pull in the Trusted Ed apps information. So one can go in there and look at privacy vetting and ratings from Common Sense Media, Student Data Privacy Consortium, nationally or state partnership if you have one. The information on the Trusted Ed's app from IMS Global. So really a full 360 view of what an EdTech tool can look like. And so when a teacher gets into that particular resource, they can look at any of the artifacts. So as CPS builds out their Skyline curriculum, and maybe they've got links directly to playlists or from the Learning Object Repository in Safari that can be linked directly here. And regardless of their single sign-on platform, they can configure a button that launches the teachers or the students directly into that tool. So they can kind of obfuscate how the underpinnings of that works. And then over here on the right side, what we're looking at is some qualitative reviews and ratings based on a research rubric that we've created in-house here that looks at different criteria of an EdTech tool. And this is important because you've done the work to build out a system of record. Now let's all start looking at the same types of grades and rating and information, not the I give it a 3 but I can't dance to it. It's really building out some inter-rater reliability and getting folks on the same page, which is very important. And this feedback can roll up to the administrator so they can get a sense of, is this a tool maybe we want to embark on a district-wide level, or is this something that, maybe a lot of teachers are not finding is meeting their needs, and perhaps it's time to drop it off. Also, I kind of just mentioned this information that provides whether or not this is a tool you may want to look at, start, stop, continue in your organization. A lot of this also can be gleaned for free at the free library. If you go to learnplatform.com, you can look at it. You don't necessarily have to have a district partnership, but you can look at some of this free vetting that's been done by community members and teachers. And this is what some of the work under the hood is going on, where they're tracking the contracts, they're tracking the costs, expiration dates. They can put in configurable tags. Maybe they want to say, these are apps and tools that support the 4 Cs, so they can do that. And then a parent level portal for this that looks at, actually I have the CPS one just as an example, without needing to sign on for parents and students, they can go there and they can search and filter and look at all of the tools that have been approved or are supported. And whatever hybrid learning may or may not look like right now, this can also be a really good resource to support those kiddos at home, where they can go here and start to see all the different tools that are being used within the system. And this provides that SOPA compliance and transparency to understand what tools are being used. We've also got some different workflows within the system. Tony had talked about ways that teachers can request that tools get approved. We've also built out a workflow within there. And then the final part around the analysis aspect, we really break this down in 2 different layers. One is around the breadth. So standing up at the mountaintop and looking across the fields and seeing what are the different tools being used in our ecosystem. We have free browser extensions that you can deploy in the system and look at that number of the EdTech top 40, how many out of the 7,000 or so library tools that we have are being used in your system. Again, that number is about 1,900 tools being used on a monthly basis. And that kind of looks like this. And I'm not going to go through all of these different screens, but I do want to get your eyes on this. This is something that that really started our work here in EdTech. It's how we look at rapid cycle evaluations being pulled in from our impact engine. And what we do is look at programmatic information from vendor provided data. So we can look at, say, Dreambox and examine the number of modules completed, or the number of videos watched, or minutes on the system. And we can tie that to a specific outcome measurement. So maybe it's something that's a nationally normed assessment, or something that you have that's a district or classroom specific component. And then we tie into the student information system, and we use one roster to pull in this information that we can now triangulate the data and also look at some of the qualitative programmatic information. And what this produces are effect size reports. So is this program having an impact on student outcomes? We're exploring this for CPS to look at perhaps some of their networks that require use of particular tools. Maybe it's a Read 180, or maybe it's Achieve 3000. Are they getting used, A, with fidelity? And if so, what is the impact that that usage is having on our students? And we can break this down by things like grade level, gender, ethnicity, because we're pulling in that student information system data and those demographics. And we can break down by usage and demographics the effect size. And for those who have had the Stats 101 class, effect size is really that relationship, the correlation between 2 different variables. And we can run control and treatment and correlative and comparative types of samples and assessments here. So really great work that we hope to embark on with the CPS to also uncover, are there funds or licenses being left on the virtual table, right? Is there, are we getting the value of our investment here based on what we see as far as the true cost of ownership and the usage of these tools? So I'm just going to kind of stop things here. Let us know. Feel free to unmute if you have any questions. We've really reached the end of the journey here. I'd like to thank Anthony and Lauren for your time. And let me see, guys, if you have any final words, and also give a minute just to see if there's any questions.
Sure. Yeah, Rob, thank you so much for the presentation, and IMS Global for setting this conference up. This has been really great. We love talking about, well, not about love, but we're very familiar with talking about EdTech products and the RFQ and how things are going in CPS. And we'd love to fill you guys in about the process, or brainstorm, or hear some feedback. So please feel free to chat it in or shout it out.
I see that Anthony has graciously put his email address in there. I know there was a question about, can they share some of the information around the RFQ. It's a big, meaty process. My hat's off to you all for undertaking this. I think, it's probably a lot of work up front, but it's gonna pay off its dividends in the long run.
Yeah, at least that's what I'm telling myself.
Good for you. keep a stiff upper lip. If there are no questions, we will depart here and give you back your 4 minutes of your morning. So thank you so much, all of you, for your time. I'm going to stop my share here and just kind of hang out. If people want to trickle in, trickle out, feel free, but we will say arrivederci. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here with us. To our speakers, to Rob, Lauren, and Anthony, thank you for sharing the great work that is taking place. Thank you to our attendees for participating. Be sure to join the rest of the sessions today, as well as throughout tomorrow. And keep in mind, today is the last day to play our little scavenger hunt game and win some great prizes. You should have gotten an email this morning with more details on how to participate in that. We'll hang out here for the next 3 minutes. Until then, hopefully we'll see you guys around the next couple of days.
Bye, y'all.